Mike woke up early in the morning from the usual alarm clock. It was already light outside. A warm Texas dawn was slowly rising over the outskirts of Austin. The last stars were fading in the sky. He quietly turned off the alarm on his smartphone and turned his head to his sleeping wife. Sarah was lying with her back to him, wrapped in a blanket almost over her head. "Sarah, it's already 7 in the morning," he called quietly, leaning towards her. His wife didn't move. Mike gently touched her shoulder. Sarah moaned sleepily, but didn't open her eyes. Lately, she had a hard time getting up in the morning. Mike understood this and didn't want to be too insistent. He quietly got out of bed and went into the kitchen. The half-empty apartment was silent, broken only by the purring of the coffee maker. Their fluffy Maine Coon Winston was lazily stretched out on the living room floor. Seeing his owner, the cat raised his head and slowly wagged his tail. "Good morning, buddy," Mike said in a low voice, walking past the cat to the coffee maker. A cool breeze blew through the open window. Despite the summer, the morning was fresh. On the wall in the kitchen hung a wedding photo portrait. In it, a radiant Sarah in a wedding dress and Mike himself, happy and young, were hugging each other. Now this picture seemed from another life. Returning to the bedroom with his coffee, he saw that Sarah was still lying in the same position. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a shadow of her figure on the wall. Mike placed the cup on the nightstand and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Sarah," he called softly again. "It's 7:15. I have to go soon." This time Sarah stirred and slowly rolled over onto her back. Her eyes were still half closed. Her light brown hair had become disheveled overnight. She looked sleepily at her husband and reluctantly reached out to turn off the alarm clock vibrating on the nightstand. "What? Is it morning already?" she croaked in a voice hoarse from sleep. "Uh-huh," Mike smiled. "I made coffee. Should I bring you some?" Sarah shielded her eyes from the light. She felt completely exhausted. She had tossed and turned for a long time during the night and had barely slept, although Mike hadn't noticed. "Yes, thank you," she finally answered, barely audibly. "Put it here, please." Mike handed her a mug of coffee. Sarah sat up, propped up by the pillows. She looked tired. Her once rosy cheeks were pale. There were light shadows under her eyes. Mike felt uneasy as he looked at her. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, sitting down next to her. Sarah shrugged and took a sip of coffee. "Fine," she replied, but her eyes remained dull. "I just barely slept again." Mike frowned. "Nightmares again? Or is it the heat? I can turn the air conditioner up higher at night." "It's not the heat," Sarah said dismissively. She set her cup on the nightstand. "It's just, I don't know, Mike. Sometimes you can't sleep." He wanted to hug her, but he wasn't sure she needed it right now. Since she quit school a few months ago, Sarah had often been depressed and withdrawn. She had trouble getting up in the morning and finding the strength to sleep at night. Mike tried to surround his wife with care, but he knew that it was not easy to fix her condition. "Maybe you should go somewhere today, take a walk," he suggested cautiously. "The sun, the fresh air." Sarah smiled sadly. "He'll take a walk. Yes, it's possible." She turned away, making it clear that she did not want to continue the conversation. Mike got out of bed with a sigh and began to dress for work. He was getting ready silently, afraid to disturb his wife once again. Winston, meanwhile, jumped onto the windowsill and thoughtfully looked out onto the street, catching sunbeams. 20 minutes later, Mike was ready. He walked over to Sarah, who had once again laid down and was staring at the ceiling. "I have to go," he said quietly. "Are you sure everything is okay?" "Yes," she answered without turning her head. Mike sighed and stroked her hand over the blanket. "Okay, see you later then. Love you." "And I love you," Sarah responded barely audibly. She heard the front door slam as Mike left. The room fell into an oppressive silence, broken only by the muffled hum of the air conditioner. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to go back to sleep, hoping to delay the beginning of another empty day. Driving to work, Mike thought about the previous evening. Sarah had eaten almost nothing for dinner and soon, citing fatigue, had gone to bed. He lay awake for a long time, wondering how to help his wife out of her gloomy state. Then Mike decided he would arrange something nice for Sarah on the weekend, for example, a trip out of town or a visit to the theater. He had to try to bring back the joy of life to her. Sarah lay still for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling. The silence was oppressive. She could hear the occasional car driving down the street outside, the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock. Another day, and nothing had happened. There had been too many of those days in the last few months. Finally, she sighed, threw off the covers, and sat up in bed. The room was stuffy, the sun was already hot, promising a hot Texas day. Sarah went to the window and pulled the curtains aside for a moment. Outside, the asphalt of the driveway gleamed blindingly, the air shimmering over the hot cars. She wandered into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. Her tired face was reflected in the mirror. Once, as a teacher, she had risen at the crack of dawn, full of energy before meeting with her students. Now she had no work to do and no desire to get out of bed. Sarah wiped her face with a towel and went down to the kitchen. Winston, hearing the steps of the mistress, walked importantly to the bowls, hinting at breakfast. Sarah mechanically poured food into the cat's bowl and changed the water. The cat rubbed against her leg, purring gratefully. "At least you have an appetite," she said quietly, watching Winston gobble up the food. She poured herself some of the remaining coffee, although it had already cooled. Without much appetite, she took a piece of bread from the bread bin and spread butter on it. After eating a couple of pieces, she felt sick. She didn't feel like eating. Sarah pushed the plate away and sat down at the kitchen table with her mug. Her laptop was lying on the table. She turned it on and automatically opened the job posting site. Just yesterday, several new notifications about teaching jobs had arrived in the mail, but they were all far away in other cities or the requirements were not suitable. And did she have the strength to return to the classroom? The last year of working at the school had finally squeezed all the strength out of her. Sarah closed the tab with the vacancies and tiredly rubbed her temples. She was 29 and felt like a pensioner, no energy, no drive, no goals. At university, she was eager to change children's lives, to be useful. And now, the computer beeped an incoming message. Sarah reluctantly looked at the screen. It was her friend from her old job, Kate. The messenger popped up. "Hi, how are you? Long time no see. We have a vacancy at our school, thought of you." Sarah sighed heavily and closed her laptop without answering. The thought of going back to school made her anxious. She vividly recalled her last day at school. In the middle of the spring semester, one of the mothers of a student had burst into her classroom after school and made a scene because of her son's low grade. She saw the parent's face twisted with anger, her own shaking hands, and complete helplessness when the next day, instead of supporting her, the principal scolded Sarah for her lack of professionalism. That evening, she packed her things and wrote a letter of resignation. Sarah exhaled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. To keep from crying, she stood up from the table. It's okay," she said quietly to herself. "I just need to do something." She cleared the cup and plate from the table and wiped away the crumbs with a rag. Then she mechanically began to tidy up the kitchen. She put the bills that had been scattered around in their places, wiped the sink, and watered the flower on the windowsill. The monotonous work distracted her from her heavy thoughts a little. A couple of hours later, the kitchen was sparkling clean, but her soul didn't feel any better. Sarah glanced at her phone. It was almost noon. There were no messages from Mike. He was probably busy at work, in his endless meetings. Sarah sat down on the living room sofa. Winston jumped up next to her and lay down, putting his head under her hand. She stroked the cat behind the ear, looking thoughtfully into the emptiness in front of her. What's wrong with me, she thought. Everyone was telling her to find a new job, to keep herself busy. But every resume, every interview seemed to take away her last strength. She felt like she was stuck in this state and couldn't get out of it on her own. The phone suddenly vibrated. Sarah jumped and looked at the screen. Mike was calling. "Hello," she answered, trying to sound cheerful. "Hello, darling. came my husband's voice from the speaker. "I decided to call to see how you are." "Everything's fine," she answered quickly. "I was just doing some housework." "That's great," Mike said with relief. "I was worried you seemed kind of sad this morning." "Everything's fine," Sarah repeated. "I just didn't get enough sleep. How are you at work?" "Yeah, I'm going to lunch now," he answered. The voices of his colleagues and the noise of the office could be heard on the other end of the line. "Listen, maybe we could go somewhere this evening. I think I'll be free around 6 o'clock." Sarah hesitated. She had been finding it increasingly difficult to go out with her husband in recent weeks. She felt bored, empty, and didn't want to ruin his evening with her appearance. "I'm not sure," she began. "I thought I'd stay home." "Well, whatever," Mike said disappointedly. "I just wanted to distract you. Maybe a movie or dinner out." "Sorry, I'm just not in the mood," she admitted. There was silence on the line. "Okay," the husband finally said softly. "Then rest. When I come back, we'll order pizza, watch something at home, okay?" "Okay," Sarah agreed quietly. "Hugs. Until the evening." "See you in the evening," she echoed and hung up. At work, Mike put his phone away and sat in silence for a while. His friend David sat next to him in the office cafeteria with a tray. "Is everything okay?" David asked, noticing his colleague's absent-mindedness. Mike shrugged. "Oh, just. Sarah's not herself again." "Because of the layoff," David clarified. "Probably. It's hard for her to stay at home." Mike swirled a glass of water. "I'm afraid she's completely lost interest in everything." David nodded understandingly. "Try to get her out somewhere on the weekend. She needs to unwind." "I'm trying. It's not working out so well yet." Mike sighed. "But thanks for worrying." They switched to work-related topics, but Mike thought about Sarah and her depression for the rest of the day. Sarah lowered the phone to her lap. Guilt stirred inside her. Mike tried his best, and she kept pushing him away. She loved her husband. He was a good man, reliable, caring. But in recent months, even his attention did not bring her joy. Sarah closed her eyes tiredly. There was still a long day of emptiness ahead. She didn't know what to do with herself. And suddenly an idea came to her. What if she really went out somewhere alone? Not on a date, of course, just to change the scenery. For example, go out for an evening to sit somewhere, in a cafe or a bar. The idea shook her a little. Yes, maybe it was worth a try. Mike wouldn't be home until 6. She had plenty of time. Sarah stood up and headed upstairs, deciding to pick out some clothes and go out into the city for a while. In the evening, Sarah left the house for the first time in a long time. She put on a light blue summer dress with short sleeves, which favorably emphasized her slender figure. She left her hair loose, only slightly combed. It was hot outside, but there was something pleasant in the light breeze. The sun was setting, painting the sky above the city in golden-orange tones. Sarah headed downtown aimlessly. She parked her car near one of the busy streets filled with bars and cafes. She remembered this street. She used to come here with friends when she was a student. It was early evening now, and the establishments were relatively quiet inside. Her gaze was drawn to a small bar on the corner, from which a soft blues melody was heard. The sign read, "The Lone Star Bar." Sarah paused, listening to the music. Someone was playing the guitar live. Her heart suddenly began to beat a little faster with excitement. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. In the room in the far corner on a small stage, a man with a guitar was humming softly into a microphone, more to himself than to the audience. Sarah sat quietly at an empty high stool near the bar. "Good evening," came a pleasant male voice from across from her. There was a bartender behind the counter, a tall, fair-haired guy in his 30s. He was wearing a black t-shirt with a rock band logo and faded jeans. He was smiling slightly absent-mindedly, apparently listening to the music. "Hi," Sarah replied, suddenly feeling embarrassed. "What would you like to drink?" The bartender wiped the glass and put the towel aside, looking at her with light, narrowed eyes. Sarah didn't even know what she wanted. She rarely drank alcohol lately. What can you advise? She asked uncertainly. The guy bowed his head slightly, looking at her appraisingly. Well, it's hot today. I can make you a refreshing cocktail. Do you like it sweet or stronger? Something light, she decided, and cool. I see. Then how about a strawberry margarita? It's summer. Sounds good, Sarah smiled timidly. The bartender nodded and began to deftly mix the ingredients. Sarah watched his movements. It seemed he was doing it on autopilot, while glancing at her. I haven't seen you here for a long time, he said casually, throwing ice into a shaker. I'm here for the first time, she admitted. I see. So I wanted to say that I hadn't met you before. He corrected himself with a friendly smile. I would have remembered. Sarah looked down, feeling a slight blush. She was unaccustomed to such casual conversations with strangers. The bartender shook the shaker, poured the cocktail into the glass, and garnished the rim with a slice of lime. Please. The first one is on me, he winked. Oh, that's not worth it, she hesitated, but he stopped her with a gesture. Nonsense. For a beautiful lady with pleasure. She thanked him and took the glass. She took a sip. The drink was cool, with a sweet and sour taste, just right. The guy watched her with curiosity. Well, how is it? Very tasty. Thank you. Good to hear. He wiped his hands and extended his palm to her. I'm Jason, by the way. Sarah, she replied, shaking his hand. His handshake was warm and confident. She noticed a tattoo of a musical staff and a small guitar on the inside of his forearm. Are you a musician? She blurted out, nodding at the tattoo. Jason chuckled, looking at his hand. You could say that. I will try to be there. Sometimes I play here in the evenings when there aren't many people. Was that you playing just now? Sarah asked, remembering the man on stage. No, this is my friend. Also a bartender and musician, he waved his hand towards the stage, where the guitarist had just finished his set and bowed to two applauding visitors. We sometimes have mini concerts of our own here. Great, Sarah smiled sincerely. She suddenly felt better about the simple, friendly conversation. Do you write music too? I write a little. I mostly play covers and work part-time at a bar. Jason shrugged slightly. Austin is a city of musicians, you know, but it's not easy to break into it. Sarah nodded. She knew about Austin. The city was indeed famous for its music scene. What do you do? He asked in response. She thought about what to answer. She no longer wanted to say the usual, I'm a teacher. Nothing yet, she said quietly, in search of myself, so to speak. Jason looked at her carefully, wiping his glass. It happens, he responded, clearly sensing a note of sadness in her voice. I myself didn't immediately find what I wanted to do. And how did you find it? She looked up at him with interest. I'm still looking, he chuckled. I tried a bunch of things after college. Music is the only thing I really love, but you can't make money from it, you see. So I mix cocktails during the day. Sarah took another sip from her glass. The alcohol warmed her insides pleasantly, although her head was still clear. But it's clear that you enjoy it, she noted. It's like you're dancing when you make drinks. Jason laughed. No one has ever called my work a dance. Thank you, I'm glad to try. He filled a mug of beer for another customer who had returned to the bar, then turned back to Sarah. And what did you do before, if it's not a secret, since you're currently searching? Sarah returned the glass in her hands. I worked at a school, she admitted after a pause. I taught children. A teacher. Cool. My mother was also a teacher, although she retired a long time ago. Really? Sarah was surprised. And in what subject? English language and literature. She practically raised me alone. She read me Huckleberry Finn at night, he recalled with a smile. That's probably why I have a passion for music. She introduced me to the world of art. Sarah smiled softly. The conversation had turned to Jason's school days, and he was telling funny stories about his mother and the books he hadn't wanted to read. Sarah listened, noticing how his face brightened at the memory. She found herself genuinely laughing at his jokes for the first time in a long time. One cocktail smoothly gave way to a second one. This time Jason convinced her to try the signature lemonade with mint and rum. Sarah felt a slight pleasant intoxication and relaxation. She did not want to leave. But the hours flew by. She glanced at her phone and suddenly remembered it was almost 6 in the evening. "Oh my God," she blurted out. "I have to go." She quickly put down her half-empty glass. Jason raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you leaving already? We were just starting to have a good chat." Sorry, I really need to go home." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. She suddenly realized that in all this time she had never mentioned her husband or home. The thought of it pricked her conscience. "Well," Jason said with a slight smile, "it was nice meeting you, Sarah. I hope you'll stop by again sometime." "Perhaps." She stood up, adjusting her purse on her shoulder. "Thank you for the company." "You're welcome," he smiled. "Hey, wait." He quickly tore a piece of paper from a small notebook by the cash register and scribbled something with a pen. Here, he handed her a piece of paper. "Here is my number, and the address of the site where I sometimes publish music. If you get bored, listen to it to your heart's content. And, you never know, you might want to talk." Sarah hesitantly took the piece of paper, which indeed had phone numbers and a link to a profile on a music site written on it. She suddenly felt so pleased that someone cared about her that it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "See you later," Jason said quietly, leaning forward slightly. And though he did nothing else, for a split second Sarah thought he wanted to hug her or kiss her cheek. She resisted the urge to reach out. Instead, Sarah stepped back, smiling warmly at him as she walked out of the bar and into the bustling street. It was already dark outside. Only the last colors of the sunset were still fading in the distance. Sarah paused for a moment, trying to stop her hands from shaking. She hid the piece of paper with Jason's number in her wallet and took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding. "What am I doing?" flashed through her mind. "I have Mike." Guilt washed over her for a second, but there was another feeling inside her, something akin to euphoria. It was as if she had come alive. An ordinary evening at a bar, talking to a stranger, and suddenly her soul felt lighter. Sarah walked quickly to the car. She needed to hurry home before Mike got worried. He knew she liked to walk sometimes, though. She texted him as she walked, "I'll be a little late, so I decided to go for a walk before dinner. I'll be there around 6:30. The answer came almost immediately, "Okay, be careful. I'm waiting for you." The next morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. The sun's rays were just penetrating through the crack between the curtains when she opened her eyes. Mike was quietly snoring next to her, his face buried in the pillow. She didn't want to wake him up early. Sarah carefully got out of bed. Her soul felt strangely light, although it was aching with vague guilt. Yesterday evening seemed like a dream. Could she really have let herself go so freely with a stranger? She went into the kitchen and decided to make breakfast for the first time in a long time. Usually in the mornings they made do with coffee and toast, but today she wanted to please her husband. Sarah got out eggs, bacon, and bread for croutons. She fried bacon in a frying pan and beat eggs for an omelet. The smell of coffee and food quickly spread throughout the house. "Wow," a surprised voice came from behind. Sarah looked around. A disheveled Mike, tall, brown-haired, wearing a crumpled t-shirt and home shorts, was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was rubbing his eyes, not quite believing what he was seeing. "You got up," she smiled a little embarrassedly. "I thought you were probably hungry." "You thought right." He came closer, looking over her shoulder. "An omelet? Wow." "With bacon and cheese," she clarified, putting the deliciously smelling omelet on plates. "Sit down, it'll be ready in a minute." Mike obediently sat down at the table. "Admit it, what happened?" he asked half-jokingly. "You're usually so sleepy in the morning, and here you are having the chef's breakfast." Sarah put plates and mugs of coffee on the table and sat down opposite. "Nothing special," she said, trying to sound casual. "I just went for a walk yesterday, unwinded a bit, even listened to some music." Music. Mike raised his eyebrows and smiled. That's good. Live or in headphones? Alive, she answered honestly. I went into a place where they were playing. Really? The husband looked pleased. I'm very glad to hear it. And I thought you were just walking around the neighborhood. It turns out you went out somewhere. Sarah took a bite of toast, trying to hide her excitement. Yes, I decided to change the environment. I was just tired of sitting at home. Mike covered her hand with his palm. And how is it? Overall, not bad. She smiled with the corner of her lips. I even liked it. That's great, Mike exhaled with visible relief. I was worried. Maybe we can go somewhere else today? Together. Sarah looked away. The offer sounded logical, but for some reason her soul did not respond. The thought of going somewhere with her husband did not cause the same thrill that she had felt yesterday. She immediately felt ashamed of the thought. Maybe on the weekend, she answered evasively, but you have work today. Yes, he glanced at his watch. By the way, I have to leave soon. He quickly finished his omelet while Sarah picked at her breakfast with her fork. It was delicious, Mike said, standing up and taking the dishes to the sink. Thank you, love. He came over and kissed the top of her head. Sarah felt a twinge of guilt inside her. I'm glad you're feeling a little better, he said softly, looking into her eyes. I really am. Thank you. I'm sorry to make you worry, she replied quietly. Mike shook his head. What are you saying? Don't apologize. Everything will be fine, I'm sure. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, then left the kitchen to get ready for work. Sarah cleared the dishes and washed the plates, trying to distract herself from her disturbing thoughts. Why did she feel only shame and pity for Mike now? He was innocent, and she felt like a stranger. When the front door slammed and her husband's car drove away, Sarah wiped her hands and automatically took her phone out of her purse. The piece of paper with Jason's number was there too. She unfolded it and looked at the numbers written on it for a few seconds. Conflicting desires fought in her head, to throw the piece of paper away and forget about yesterday, or to save it and write to him. Sarah quickly folded the paper and put it back. To distract herself, she opened her laptop and typed in the website address that was listed next to the number. It turned out to be a music resource with a profile named Jason Brooks. There were several tracks posted on the page. Sarah put on her headphones and pressed play. Soft guitar chords filled her mind. Jason sang in a quiet, husky voice about something sad and bright at the same time. The song was called Empty Streets, Empty Streets. Sarah read the short text under the track. It seemed to be about the feelings of a lonely person wandering around the city at night in search of lost meaning. Sarah's heart sank. These words seemed to describe her own state. She listened to one track, then another. Jason clearly had talent. The music was simple but catchy. In one of the descriptions, he thanked the listeners and mentioned that he played in several bars in Austin, including this one, the Lone Star Bar, on Wednesdays and Fridays. It's Friday, she thought. That meant he would be playing there tonight. Sarah took off her headphones, feeling her heart suddenly beat faster. The thought of seeing Jason again, of hearing him live, in his element tugged at her, giving her no peace. She got up from the table and paced the room. No, this is crazy, she told herself. On the other hand, why not just go listen to some music? She wasn't doing anything wrong, was she? Sarah looked back at Winston, who was dozing on the windowsill. Do you think I should go? She asked the cat half-jokingly. Winston lazily opened one eye, then yawned. Sarah grinned. What an advisor you are. By lunchtime, she had already firmly decided that she would go out to the concert that evening. That's what she called it in her mind, so as not to feel guilty. She would write to Mike that she had met a friend, let's say, the same Kate, and would be back late. Indeed, she hadn't seen her friend for a long time. Why not? Mike would be glad that she was establishing communication. The thought calmed her a little. For the first time in a long time, Sarah found herself looking forward to the evening. In the evening, when the sun began to set, Sarah began to get ready. She put on a light summer dress of a light blue color, which Mike once called her favorite. She left her hair loose, only slightly combed. She lingered in front of the mirror longer than usual. There had been no reason to dress up for a long time. Her heart was pounding with anticipation and fear at the same time. For a moment, she glanced at her wedding ring. The thin gold glittered on her ring finger. Her hand shook involuntarily. A lump formed in her throat. Sarah carefully removed the ring and put it in her jewelry box. She would tell herself that she did it just so she wouldn't lose it. She was going to a concert, after all. But in her heart, she knew the real reason. Before leaving, Sarah texted Mike. "Kate asked me to meet up tonight. I want to unwind. I'll be back late. Don't wait up, okay?" The answer came almost immediately. "Sure, have fun. Love you." These words made Sarah's heart tremble. She almost burst into tears right there on the threshold. But she just wiped away the traitorous tear, took a deep breath, and left the house. The Lone Star Bar was much busier than it had been on a weekday. The air inside was heavy with body heat, mixed with the smell of spilled beer and perfume. Sarah had trouble finding a nearby parking spot. Small groups of people were already milling around the entrance, smoking and chatting. Inside, there was a buzz of voices mixed with music. A band was playing energetic rock and roll on stage. Sarah squeezed inside, her palms instantly sweating. She managed to snag a spot at the side of the bar. Jason noticed her almost immediately. He was behind the counter, pouring beer for someone. When he saw her, he smiled as if he were seeing an old friend. Sarah's heart sank. She waved awkwardly at him. Jason nodded, indicating that he had seen her and would come over when he got the chance. Sarah looked around. The room was almost full, lots of young people, couples, groups. She felt a little out of place, like she was doing something forbidden. A few minutes later, Jason found a moment to approach. "Sarah," he said joyfully, shouting over the noise. "You've come." "You invited me to listen, so here I am," she answered, trying to speak casually, although everything inside was trembling. "I'm very happy." He leaned closer so as not to shout. "The guys will finish playing now, then I'll come on in about 10 minutes. Would you like something to drink?" "Can I have some water?" she asked. She didn't need alcohol now her head was spinning anyway. Jason handed her a bottle of cold water. "Don't leave after my set, okay? Will you wait for me?" Sarah nodded. He smiled, touching her elbow for a second, then hurried off to serve the others. When his name was announced on stage, Sarah froze in anticipation. Jason came out with a guitar, sat on a high stool in front of the microphone. The audience applauded. Apparently, he had his fans. Sarah suddenly felt proud, although she did not really know this man. "Hello, everyone," Jason said into the microphone, smiling at the crowd. "Thank you for coming. I'm going to play some of my songs today." There were cheers. Jason nodded and began playing a tune that Sarah knew. It was "Empty Streets," the same composition she had listened to during the day. The quiet chords were initially drowned out by the noise of the hall, but gradually people became quiet, listening. Jason's voice was deeper and more emotional than on the recording. He sang about the emptiness of the night streets and a lonely soul searching for light. Sarah felt like every line was addressed to her. Her eyes even stung with tears. After the first song, the crowd applauded louder. Someone whistled. Jason smiled at the stage, caught Sarah's eye, and winked at her. She flushed, clapped too, feeling incredibly uplifted. Then came a more cheerful song. He changed the mood, performing a catchy blues. Then a couple more melodic ballads. Sarah did not take her eyes off him, forgetting about everything in the world. When the set was over, Jason thanked the crowd and walked off stage. The music in the hall was replaced by a recording. Someone's hit started playing, and the noise of voices returned. A few minutes later, Jason approached Sarah again, this time not from behind the counter, but from the side of the room. "So how do you like it?" he asked a little cautiously. "Did you like it?" "Very," she answered sincerely. "You sing wonderfully, and the words, they are so touching." "Thank you," he said softly, looking into her eyes. "I'm glad you came." They just looked at each other for a few seconds in the hustle and bustle of the bar. Then Jason suggested, "It's noisy here. Maybe we should go outside. There's a quiet courtyard nearby." Sarah agreed. She picked up her purse, and together they pushed their way to the exit. It was noticeably cooler outside. There were tables for smokers in the small courtyard behind the bar, but there was no one there now. The hum of music came muffled through the walls. Sarah leaned against the railing of the wooden deck, trying to compose herself. Jason stood next to her, placing the guitar he had brought with him against the wall. "You look especially beautiful today," he said quietly, glancing at her dress. Sarah looked down, embarrassed. "Thank you. I haven't dressed up for anything for ages." "It's in vain. It suits you very well." She felt his closeness only half a meter away, and her head was slightly spinning, like that time from the cocktail. Only now it was not the alcohol that caused the intoxication, but the presence of this man nearby. Jason. She began quietly, not knowing what she wanted to say. Maybe apologize, leave, but the words stuck. He didn't finish either. The next second, he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. Jason hesitated just a moment, then leaned down and gently touched his lips to hers. The world swam. Sarah seemed to freeze for a moment, and then she kissed him back. She felt the warmth of his lips, the slight taste of beer and mint. Everything inside her trembled from fear, from a surge of desire, from the realization that a line had been crossed. His hand came to rest on her waist, pulling her closer. Sarah almost lost her balance and pressed herself against his chest. The kiss became deeper, more passionate. For a few long seconds, she forgot everything else herself, her husband, her guilt. There was only this moment under the summer night sky, and Jason's arms wrapped around her gently, as if she were fragile. Finally, they pulled away at the same time, catching their breath. Sarah felt her cheeks burn hotly. She covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God, what are we doing?" Jason carefully removed his hands, giving her space. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to embarrass you." "No," she dropped her hands and shook her head, feeling her eyes betrayingly water again. "It's me. I mean, I really like you, Jason, but it's all so complicated." He was silent, waiting for her to continue. Sarah ran a trembling hand through her hair. "You see, She began and hesitated, deciding to tell the truth. "I have a husband." At that very moment, she was afraid to look Jason in the face. He was silent for a few seconds. "I see," he said quietly at last. Sarah did not detect sadness or condemnation in his voice, more like understanding. She felt tears rolling down her eyes. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I didn't expect it myself. Everything is so wrong." Jason pulled a clean handkerchief from his jeans pocket and gently handed it to her. "It's all right," he said. "Please don't cry." Sarah dabbed her eyes. "Are you angry?" she asked plaintively. "No," he shook his head and smiled sadly. "A little stunned, maybe. You didn't have to share anything with me. It's just a shame that—" He didn't finish, but Sarah understood. "It's a pity that everything is so complicated for them." "Are you in an unhappy marriage?" he asked cautiously after a pause. Sarah shrugged in confusion. "No, I mean, he's a good man, but it's about me. I'm lost. It's a long story." She felt unbearably ashamed. She expected Jason to turn away and leave, but he stayed close. "If you want to tell me, I'll listen," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him. In the reflection of the street lamp, his face expressed genuine concern. And then she spoke. The words came pouring out, about how hard it had been to be a teacher, how she had burned out and quit, how she now felt empty and useless, how she was sitting at home alone day after day while her husband was at work, losing herself, about how Mike was a good man, but he didn't understand what was going on inside her, and how last night, for the first time in months, she had felt alive. Jason listened in silence, only nodding occasionally. When Sarah fell silent, having spoken, she felt a little better, although her heart was still pounding. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. "I can imagine how difficult it is for you." He touched her hand, gently squeezing her fingers. Sarah, he continued hesitantly, I don't want to hurt you or ruin anyone's life. I like you very much, I really do. But I know it's not easy. Yes, she whispered, looking away. If you want to stop there. He began, but his voice trembled. I will understand. She looked at his hand, which still held her fingers, and suddenly she realized clearly she didn't want this warm contact to disappear, no matter what. Sarah shook her head. I don't know. I don't know what's right. But she looked into his eyes and finished quietly. But I don't want to stop now. Jason smiled uncertainly, but there was hope in his eyes. He pulled her gently to him, this time just hugging her, pressing her head to his shoulder. Sarah closed her eyes. They stood there silently for several minutes, listening to the distant music. Finally, she pulled away. I have to go home. It's late. Sure, Jason removed his hands, running his palm over her shoulder one last time. Can I call you tomorrow? Sarah nodded, looking briefly into his face. Yes, I think it is possible. Her heart was torn by conflicting feelings, but she didn't want to let him go. Jason picked up his guitar. Let me walk you to the car, he suggested. They left the courtyard together and walked slowly down the quiet street to the parking lot. At the car, Sarah turned to him. Thank you. For the evening, and for listening. Don't thank me, he smiled sadly. I'm glad you came today. They stood there awkwardly. She wanted to kiss him goodbye, but Sarah held back. She only timidly touched his hand. Then, until next time, she said softly. See you later, Sarah, he replied. She got into the car, and Jason waited for her to start the engine. They exchanged a last glance through the glass, and she drove away, feeling his gaze on her back. On the way home, Sarah alternately cried and smiled. Everything inside her was mixed up guilt, fear, and at the same time, a strange joy that she was not alone in her feelings. It hurt her to deceive her husband, but now she could not stop. These new emotions were too strong. The next day, the phone rang around noon while Mike and Sarah were at home. Sarah was folding laundry and Mike was busy in the garage. She jumped when she heard the ringtone as an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Her heart sank. It was probably Jason. She pressed reject and quickly put the phone away. Her hands were shaking slightly. A minute later, a message arrived. Hi, this is Jason. Can I make a call? Sarah glanced back. Mike was still in the garage and hadn't heard the bell. She hurried out the back door into the yard, typing a reply. Hi, I can't talk. I'll call you back later. Jason immediately typed back. Okay, I'll wait. Sarah was not herself for the rest of the day. The thought of talking to Jason burned inside her. She had to pretend everything was normal in front of her husband, but inside she was seething. It wasn't until the evening, when she and Mike had gone to the supermarket to buy groceries and returned, that she managed to find a moment alone. Mike stayed behind to unload the bags, and Sarah, citing a headache, went upstairs. In the bedroom, she closed the door and dialed Jason's number, holding her breath. He answered almost immediately. Hello, his muffled voice came through the receiver. Hello, she responded just as quietly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Sorry I couldn't come sooner. It's okay, I understand, he replied. How are you? I don't know, she said honestly. I've been thinking about yesterday all day. There was a second's pause on the other end of the line. Me too, Jason admitted quietly. That's why I decided to call. Sarah could hear her heart beating faster. Mike's home, she whispered into the phone, as if anyone might hear. It's hard for me to speak freely. Got it. Then listen, he responded just as quietly. Maybe we'll see each other? Calmly, without fuss. I think we need to talk. See you, she echoed, both scared and happy. And when? I can't today, you understand. Sure. Maybe Monday afternoon? Will you be alone? Yes, she answered after a short thought. He's at work until the evening. Okay, then, can I come to you? Or is it more convenient somewhere outside? Sarah bit her lip nervously. Bringing him into her home seemed unthinkable, forbidden, but part of her wanted it desperately. Come, she finally decided, at 1 o'clock, okay? Fine, I'll be there. They were silent for a moment, not knowing what else to say, but not wanting to hang up. Sarah, Jason finally said quietly, take care of yourself, okay? Tears came to her eyes. See you on Monday, she whispered and hung up. On Monday morning, Sarah was restless. She woke up long before the alarm rang. She slept fitfully all night, tormented by thoughts it was not too late to cancel everything, to tell him not to come. But with each passing minute, she realized he would not cancel. Mike noticed his wife's behavior. He asked her several times during breakfast if everything was okay. Sarah nodded, hiding behind her coffee. She felt like her husband could see right through her, that guilt was written all over her face. But Mike attributed her nervousness to her previous poor health and did not press her, only suggested that she go to the doctor if the migraine did not go away. When he left for work, Sarah began mechanically cleaning the house. Everything inside was burning with anticipation and fear. She went to the mirror several times, examining herself critically. She put on a light sweater and jeans, then changed into a summer dress, and then went back to jeans, finding the dress too provocative. She lightly touched up her lips and immediately wiped the lipstick off with a napkin. By 12 o'clock, the house was sparkling clean. Sarah herself did not notice how she scrubbed everything, trying to calm the trembling in her body. She even baked banana muffins, mindlessly following some recipe from the internet, just to pass the time. At exactly 1 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah glanced out the window and recognized Jason's silver sedan. Her heart pounded in her throat. She unlocked the front door before he had time to ring the bell. Jason stood in the doorway, wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. He smiled uncertainly. "Hello." "Hello," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush. "Come in quickly." She looked around the street, but there were no neighbors nearby. Sarah let him in and latched the door. "These are for you," Jason said quietly, holding out the flowers. "Thank you." Sarah took the bouquet. It was daisies and cornflowers, simple but so bright among the greenery. She suddenly thought about the last time Mike had given her flowers. It seemed to be on their last anniversary, almost a year ago. "Come in," she repeated, noticing that Jason was frozen at the threshold, shifting his weight. "Take off your shoes, please." He took off his sneakers, looking around a little awkwardly. It must have been strange for him to be in a strange family home. Sarah led him into the living room. "It's very cozy here," he noted. "Thank you." She carefully placed the bouquet in an empty vase on the table. Her hands were weak. "Sit down. Coffee? Tea? I have some fresh muffins." She felt like she was saying too much. All these formalities seemed ridiculous, considering why they were there. Jason smiled softly and shook his head. "No need for fuss. Let's just sit." He sat down on the sofa. Sarah settled down next to him, on the edge. They were silent for a few long seconds. Winston sensed the new man and came into the living room, looking at the guest with interest in his amber eyes. The cat came closer and sniffed Jason's jeans. "Wow, what a giant," Jason said quietly, holding out his hand, palm up, for the cat to sniff. "That's Winston," Sarah said, her voice a little hoarse. "He's usually cautious around strangers." Winston actually sniffed Jason distrustfully for a couple of seconds, then, apparently satisfied, rubbed his head against his hand. "I think he liked me," Jason smiled. Sarah smiled weakly back. She instinctively reached out and stroked the cat's back. Her heart was pounding. Sitting like this next to Jason in her own home was both sweet and painful. "Sarah," Jason finally began, looking her straight in the face. "We can just talk if you want. I don't want to push it." She realized that he was giving her a chance to stop. But it was too late. She had waited too long for this. "I don't want to talk," she whispered. The next moment they were reaching for each other. Their lips met in a hungry kiss that immediately flared up with renewed intensity. Sarah wrapped her arms around Jason's shoulders, feeling him holding her tightly against him. Her head was buzzing. Reality seemed to cease to exist around her. A second later, Winston meowed in alarm and rushed out of the room, startled by the sudden movement. But Sarah was no longer paying attention to anything except the hot touches and the rapid beating of her heart. They kissed, forgetting about everything. Jason ran his hand down her back, her shoulders gently but insistently. Sarah choked from the overwhelming desire. All the fears and doubts that tormented her melted away at that moment. She didn't remember exactly how they moved into the bedroom. She only felt the cold sheets on her back and the warmth of his body next to her. She pulled his t-shirt off herself. He unbuttoned her blouse with trembling hands. When had she managed to change from a sweater to a blouse? A distant thought flashed through her mind. Their clothes fell to the floor, mixing in disarray. "Are you sure?" he whispered for a moment, looking into her eyes. In response, she only pulled him closer, responding with another kiss. Further words were not needed. Sunlight streamed through the drawn curtains of the bedroom, playing in stripes on the bed. Sarah lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. The sheet half covered her naked body. Jason lay next to her, propped up on his elbow. He watched her silently, his fingers thoughtfully running over her shoulder. It all happened so fast that it seemed unreal now. Sarah could hardly believe that she had crossed a line she never thought she would cross. A heavy lump gradually grew in her chest. "What are you thinking about?" Jason asked quietly, breaking the silence. Sarah swallowed. Her voice refused to obey, and she only shook her head, brushing away a tear that had rolled down her temple. Jason sat up, gently brushing away the tear with his thumb. "Do you regret it?" he asked directly, looking into her eyes. His sincere, slightly frightened look only stirred her soul even more. Sarah covered her face with her palms. "I don't know," she squeezed out through her sobs. A warm embrace enveloped her as Jason pulled her head to his chest. "Hush," he whispered, stroking her hair. "Everything's okay." But nothing was good. Sarah sobbed silently, her whole body shaking. She felt disgusting not because being close to Jason was unpleasant, no. On the contrary, it was surprisingly tender and passionate. But the thought that she had just betrayed Mike tormented her mercilessly. Finally, she pulled herself together and pulled the blanket over herself. Jason sat down next to her, his feet on the floor. He, too, began to gather up the scattered clothes. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly, wiping her eyes with the edge of the sheet. "Don't apologize," he replied just as quietly, putting on his jeans. "I'm sorry I hurt you." "No, it's not your fault," she shook her head, wrapping herself in the blanket. "It's me. It's my fault." Jason zipped up his shirt and picked it up off the floor. Sarah noticed his hands were shaking. He was just as worried about what had happened as she was. "Sarah," he began cautiously, "I know it's all over now, but it was a mistake," she blurted out suddenly, without looking at him. "I'm sorry." He froze, clutching his shirt in his hands. There was silence for a few seconds, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. "I see," Jason said dully. "You think so." Sarah bit her lip to keep from crying again. She wanted to rush to him, to hug him, and at the same time to take everything back. "I don't know," she whispered, lowering her head. "I felt good with you, but I can't go on like this." Jason silently put on his shirt and sat on the edge of the bed, not looking at her. "I won't ask you for anything," he said finally, quietly. "I understand how you feel." Sarah dropped her face into her hands. For a few minutes they just sat in silence, a meter apart, but seemingly infinitely far from each other. Jason was the first to move. He stood up. "I guess I better leave." Sarah glanced at her watch. It was about 3 o'clock. There were still 4 hours until Mike returned. The neighbors hadn't seen Jason, but they couldn't risk it any longer. "Yes," she said in a choked voice. "I'm sorry. I need to pull myself together." He nodded, no longer trying to convince her to stay or decide anything. He walked up to her, touched her shoulder for a second, but quickly pulled his hand away, feeling her tense up. "If you need," he began, but didn't finish. Instead, he sighed. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." She watched silently as he turned and walked away, closing the bedroom door quietly behind him. A minute later, the front door slammed shut and Jason was gone. On the street, Jason stopped, leaning heavily against the door of his car. He didn't feel anger, only emptiness and bitterness. He truly did like this woman, but he knew her heart had always belonged to someone else. After a few minutes of hesitation, Jason got into his car and drove away, leaving this story behind forever. As soon as his footsteps faded away, Sarah climbed out of bed. She was shivering, even though the room was stuffy. Her clothes were scattered on the floor, mixed with the bedspread. The sheets were thrown down in a crumpled heap. There were signs of what had happened here everywhere. Sarah began to tidy up feverishly. She pulled the pillowcases and sheet off the bed, crumpling them into a ball. She picked up her blouse, her bra. Bumping into each item, she remembered how quickly they had thrown them off, and her heart sank. She felt sick for a second and had to sit on the edge of the bed and take a few deep breaths. Winston peered into the room, his tail moving along the floor. The cat looked tense, as if he sensed his mistress's confusion. "It's okay, baby," Sarah said hoarsely, although she didn't believe these words. She stood up again and forced herself to move. She quickly dressed in clean underwear and a t-shirt. Then she carried the sheets downstairs and threw them in the washing machine. She threw her blouse in there too. It smelled of Jason's men's cologne. That haunting woodsy note was now unbearable. Sarah washed herself in the shower, vigorously rubbing her skin with a washcloth, trying to wash away his scent and touch. Then she dried herself and changed into house shorts and a t-shirt. She looked into the bedroom. It seemed that nothing incriminating was left. There was only the fresh smell of washing powder, since she generously sprayed the room with air freshener. Jason's clothes seemed to have disappeared too. He quickly gathered his things. Sarah spent the remaining hours before Mike returned in a daze. She mechanically finished her chores, started the washing machine, then began cooking dinner, the first time in a long time that she had decided to cook anything herself. She felt she had to make up for her guilt by at least caring for the husband she had deceived. When the garage door opened at 6:30, Mike's car was returning. There was already spaghetti with sauce and chopped salad on the table. Sarah tried not to think about why she was trying so hard. She was just doing something to keep from going crazy. "I'm home," Mike's voice came from the doorway. Sarah, finishing setting the plates, almost dropped her fork in surprise. She was so tense. "Hello," she responded as calmly as possible. Mike entered the kitchen and looked around in surprise at the orderly surroundings and the table set with dinner. "Wow, did you prepare all this?" "Yes, I decided it was time to pamper you," she smiled faintly. Mike came up to her with a satisfied cry and kissed her on the cheek. "Thank you, dear. How are you today?" Sarah turned away under the pretext of taking the bread out of the oven. "Fine. I was busy with things." They sat down to dinner. Mike, tired after work, ate with appetite and told them some news from the office in a low voice. Sarah listened absent-mindedly, inserting interjections into the pauses. She tried her best to act natural, but inside everything was turning over. She wanted to rush to him with a confession and hide from his gaze at the same time. Every time Mike looked at her with love or thanked her for dinner, Sarah felt a sick feeling of guilt rise in her throat. After dinner, she quickly started doing the dishes just to avoid unnecessary conversations. Mike noticed her state. "Does your head still hurt? You look so pale." "It hurts a little," she confirmed quietly. "You definitely need to get checked out," he frowned. "Let's make an appointment with a doctor tomorrow." "No need," she waved it off. "I just overexert myself today. I get tired and it starts to ache." He put his arm around her shoulders from behind as she stood at the sink. "Stop working so hard. The house can wait. You'd better rest." Sarah felt a lump in her throat and forced herself to hold back her tears. "I'll be right back. I need to lie down," she whispered, freeing herself from his arms. "Sure, go ahead," Mike said softly. "I'll clean up here myself." She nodded and almost ran out of the kitchen. She went upstairs and locked herself in the bathroom. There, turning on the water, she burst into tears, pressing her fists to her mouth so that no one could hear her. Downstairs, meanwhile, Mike had indeed put the leftovers in containers and washed the dishes. He felt that something was wrong with his wife again. In the morning, she had seemed a little nervous but collected, and in the evening, she had been completely upset. Perhaps depression had set in again. Mike decided tomorrow he would persuade her to see a specialist. He couldn't put it off any longer. An hour later, Sarah, having calmed down and tidied herself up, came downstairs. Mike was already sitting in front of the TV, watching the news and lazily stroking Winston, who was purring on his lap. Noticing his wife, he patted the sofa next to him. "Come to me." Sarah came over and sat down next to him. Mike put his arms around her, and she froze in his warm, familiar embrace. Once they had brought her peace, but now they only intensified the painful feeling of her own lies. She leaned her head on his shoulder, not daring to speak. The television was quietly broadcasting some city news. Winston crawled onto Sarah's lap, rubbed himself against her hand, demanding to be stroked. She mechanically ran her hand over the cat's fluffy fur. "Maybe we should put on a movie?" Mike asked after a minute. "Go ahead," she agreed without enthusiasm. Mike changed the channel to a light comedy. They sat huddled side by side, and as the bright images changed on the screen, Sarah found herself thinking that this might be the last quiet evening they would have together like this. Her secret weighed heavily on her, but she hoped that if she could just stop seeing Jason and pretend it had never happened, maybe it would all be forgotten. Maybe she could go on with her life as if nothing had happened. The thought was small comfort. Sarah wrapped her trembling arms around the cat, falling into a heavy, joyless sleep on Mike's unsuspecting shoulder. On Saturday morning, the house was filled with sunlight and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Mike, still in his pajama bottoms and t-shirt, was pulling the laundry he'd washed the night before out of the dryer. Sarah stood nearby, putting clean clothes into baskets. They were both trying to keep busy, avoiding each other's eyes. After a nervous start to the week, there was a tense silence between them. Winston rubbed against Mike's legs, purring. Mike leaned over and stroked the cat. "Well, Winnie, will you help us?" The cat meowed and ran away. At that moment, Mike winced, catching a sharp, unpleasant smell. "Do you feel it?" he asked, looking at his wife. "It seems like the cat has done something nasty." Sarah, too, caught a familiar, sharp whiff of cat urine. She looked around. "Yes, it looks like he was aiming. We need to find it." Mike walked down the hall, sniffing the air. The smell was stronger as he approached the laundry room door. He peered inside the small room where the washer, dryer, and laundry baskets were. "Here," he called. There was a pile of unsorted laundry lying on the floor by the wall. Sarah had collected it yesterday, but hadn't had time to load the second batch. The laundry room was cramped, and the sharp cat aroma immediately hit her nose. Suspicious damp spots were visible on top of the pile of dark clothes. "Damn," Mike breathed out, bending over. "Everything's wet here." "I'll have to wash it again," she said guiltily. "I didn't notice he came here." Mike was already taking clothes out of the basket to assess the damage. He squinted angrily. Apparently, this was not the first time the cat had marked, so he was holding back his irritation. "Damn, I almost got everything wet," he muttered, throwing aside an old t-shirt soaked in cat urine. "I'll have to wash it again." Sarah stepped closer. "Let me do it myself." "No, I've already started," Mike snapped. He pulled out a couple more things and threw them into the empty bucket. Suddenly, his hand froze. Among the crumpled clothes, something caught his eye. Sarah tensed, following his gaze. Mike slowly picked up a black item from the back of the basket. He unfolded it. It was a pair of men's boxer shorts, black with a gray elastic band. They were covered in cat urine, giving off a strong odor. Mike instantly realized that the thing didn't belong to him. He stared silently at the panties in his hand, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "What the hell is this?" he muttered in surprise. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. Her face was frozen with terror. Her tongue seemed stuck in her throat. Panic burned in her chest. I don't know, she said almost silently. Mike turned his head to her. Their eyes met. There was bewilderment in her husband's eyes, which quickly gave way to a terrible insight. Mike felt something inside him break. You don't know, he echoed, his voice shaking. Sarah, what the hell is this? He shook the find in the air. Sarah was speechless. Her throat was dry, no words would come. Mike rose slowly to his feet, clutching the other man's underwear in his fist. His face was rapidly turning red. Whose damn panties are these? He almost hissed, looking straight at her. Sarah took a step back. She felt like her heart was going to break. Mike, she whispered, it's not what you think. Not what I think, he exploded, throwing the wet cloth on the floor. What then? Come on, enlighten me. She opened her mouth helplessly, but could not squeeze out a sound. Tears were already running down her cheeks. Mike took a step forward, looking at her with an expression as if he was seeing her for the first time. You're cheating on me, aren't you? He asked hoarsely. With whom? Who was in our house? Sarah staggered. She covered her face with shaking hands. Forgive me, please. Then yes, he almost growled. What the hell, Sarah? He stepped back and slammed his fist into the door frame. Winston, who had been watching warily from the corridor, took off and ran upstairs to be on the safe side. Mike, please. Sarah sobbed, trying to get closer to him. Let me explain. Explain? He turned around, his eyes flashing with anger and pain. Are you serious? He was breathing heavily, trying to control himself. The words came with difficulty. I, damn it, worry about you every day. And you. He clutched his head as if it physically hurt him to think. Sarah stepped closer and reached for his hand. It's my fault. I have nothing to justify myself with. I'm so sorry. Don't touch me. Mike jerked his hand away. Sarah stumbled, sobbing. Never before had he looked at her with such hatred. There was a heavy pause, broken only by their heavy breathing. Finally, Mike squeezed out. Who is he? Sarah shook her head. It doesn't matter. Nobody. How is it not important? He suddenly roared. He paced nervously around the cramped laundry room, hands on his hips, then stopped in front of her again. How long has this been going on? He said rudely. It. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her chin. It was a mistake. One time. Mike smiled bitterly. Mistake. Someone else's panties in my house. Is that just a mistake, in your opinion? Sarah covered her face with her hands. It seemed there were no more tears left, only hoarse sighs were escaping from her chest. You brought him here, to our bed? Mike asked in a strangled voice, his voice breaking. Sarah was silent, but her silence was quite eloquent. Mike turned away, clutching the back of his head with his hands. He looked like he was about to punch a wall or break something. Oh God, he groaned. How disgusting. Sarah tried to speak again. Mike, listen, please. I was out of my mind. I felt so empty. You can't even imagine. I didn't mean to hurt you, He turned around abruptly. You didn't mean to hurt me. Well, congratulations, you didn't do well. She tried to come up and touch his shoulder, but he pulled away, stepping aside. Don't you dare touch me, he said through clenched teeth. It's hard for me to even breathe the same air as you right now. Sarah sobbed, burying her hand in the doorframe. Forgive me, she repeated in despair. Forgive me. I don't know what came over me. I felt so lonely, so worthless. So that's an excuse. Mike chuckled sarcastically, looking at her from under his brows. You were lonely, and you decided to sleep with the first guy you met. He's not the first person I met. She blurted out before she had time to think. Mike narrowed his eyes. Ah, so you know him. Who the hell is he? Sarah bit her tongue. Telling the truth would only make things worse. But Mike looked demanding. The bartender, she whispered, in one bar. Bartender, he echoed with a bitter smile. Fine. My wife's sleeping with some bartender while I'm working my ass off. The words seemed to knock the wind out from under Sarah's feet. She had never heard Mike swear in such a tone, every word venomous and deeply hurt. You wouldn't understand, she whispered. Of course, I have a good life, don't I? He blurted out. Everything is great, my wife has fun all day long, and I, a stupid idiot, don't notice anything. No, it's not like that. Sarah shook her head, clutching her hair. I love you, Mike. I never wanted to lose you. Do you love me? He smiled bitterly. Yes, it's obvious how much you love me. He kicked the laundry basket. It tipped over with a crash, sending a stench down the hall. Sarah winced. Mike, she called pitifully, holding out her hands to him. Don't go. Let's talk. There was a pleading look in her eyes, but Mike's face seemed to have turned to stone. Talk? He asked quietly. I have nothing to talk to you about, Sarah. Mike felt he couldn't scream or look her in the eye anymore. It was too painful. With that, he turned abruptly and walked out of the laundry room. She rushed after him. Mike, please wait. He went into the bedroom and began feverishly taking t-shirts and jeans out of the closet, randomly shoving them into a sports bag. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her whole body shaking. What are you doing? As you can see, I'm leaving, he said, without stopping his preparations for a second. Please, don't. Her voice broke. Let's talk. We can solve. Mike zipped up his shabbily stuffed bag and looked at her directly for the first time since he'd walked into the room, pain in his eyes. Decide? He repeated wearily. No, Sarah, there is nothing to decide. You have decided everything for us. He threw his bag over his shoulder and moved towards the exit. She blocked his path, trying to grab his hand. Don't leave me, please. He stopped only half a step away. Tall, with a bag over his shoulder, he looked down at her, and Sarah barely recognized her gentle, caring husband. Before her stood a wounded, broken man. Go away, he said quietly. Get out of the way, Sarah. She sobbed but did not move. Then Mike gently but firmly pushed her away with his hand and walked forward. Sarah followed him. Where are you going? He didn't answer. He went downstairs, put his bag by the door, and put on his jacket from the hanger. Sarah stood on the steps, not daring to come closer. Winston sat in the corner of the hall, watching what was happening with fear. Mike took the car keys. For a second, his eyes met hers. I don't know who you are now, he said in a flat, icy tone. But the woman I loved is gone. Sarah began to sob, clapping her hands to her mouth. Mike looked away, opened the door, and walked out, slamming the door loudly. The silence that fell on the house after he left was deafening. Sarah slid slowly to the bottom step of the stairs, covering her face with her hands. Her body shook with silent sobs. Winston came up to her and meowed piteously, sitting down next to her. But Sarah could not console even herself. Her life was falling apart, and now there was nothing that could be done. Left alone in the empty house, Sarah couldn't move for a long time. She sat on the step, covering her face with her hands, and only when her legs went numb did she slowly rise. The things from the overturned basket were still scattered in the hallway, and a pungent smell was spreading. This brought her to her senses. She needed to clean up at least this. She automatically collected the wet things in a bag, wiped the floor with a rag soaked in disinfectant. She shoved the stranger's men's boxers there, in the bag, without even looking at them as evidence of her crime. She carried the bag out to the back porch, slamming the door. Then, staggering from the weakness that had come over her, she reached the living room and fell onto the sofa. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock in the living room. Just this morning, her life had seemed shaky, but still whole. Now it was in pieces. Mike was gone. He looked at her with such disappointment and disgust. Sarah groaned, covering her ears with her hands, trying to drive these images from her head. Winston meowed quietly next to her. The cat jumped onto the sofa and lay down next to her, looking into her face with his big eyes. Sarah sobbed and carefully hugged her furry friend. Forgive me, she whispered, either to the cat or to herself. Forgive me. She was shaking with tears. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. She wanted to call Mike, beg him to come back, but he was unlikely to pick up the phone now, and what could she say that she hadn't said there on the spot? Sarah forced herself to stand up. She literally dragged her feet up to the bedroom. There were reminders of what had happened everywhere. Open closet doors, scattered things that Mike had pulled out when packing. The bed was rumpled. His abandoned alarm clock lay on the nightstand. Sarah touched the pillow he had slept on with her hand, and she burst into tears again, burying her face in this pillow, absorbing the subtle, familiar scent of his cologne. She remembered their wedding day. 5 years ago, Mike stood at the altar and looked at her with eyes shining with happiness. Then it seemed to her that they had a long and bright life ahead of them. He carefully held her hands and whispered the words of the vow, promising to love and support her always. Now only memories remain from those bright hopes. Mike was the most reliable and kind husband, and with her actions she crossed out everything. What have I done? She moaned through her sobs. Never before had she felt such self-loathing. Yes, she had been depressed for the past few months, but it was nothing compared to the knowledge that she had destroyed their family with her own hands. After a while, the tears stopped flowing. Sarah lay on her bed, staring helplessly at the ceiling with her swollen eyes. Her head was pounding. She knew she couldn't sit back and do nothing. Mike had left in a rage, but maybe all was not lost. Maybe when he cooled down, they could talk. The hope was weak, almost ghostly, but Sarah clung to it. She had to try to get through to him, explain what she hadn't been able to in the heat of the scandal. She found the phone. A few missed calls, one from an unknown number. Jason must have realized something was up because she hadn't texted him back in the last few days. A couple of messages from Kate asking if she was okay. Kate had seen her online yesterday and was worried. Sarah didn't care about Jason or her friends right now. She opened the Mike's favorite contact in the messenger. The last exchange was his heart, sent a couple of days ago. Her heart sank. She quickly typed, "Please, let me talk to you. I know it's my fault. I'm so sorry. Please." After sending it, she waited, but there was no response. Two gray check marks showed that the message had not been read. Mike had most likely turned off his phone or was simply ignoring her. Then Sarah decided to call. She looked at his avatar for a long time, a photo of them together from a year ago, both smiling on the beach. The lump in her throat rose again. She pressed the call button. The dial tone came, but there was no answer. She tried again, the same thing. He didn't want to talk to her. Sarah lay back down on the rumpled bed and closed her eyes. She had to wait. Maybe try again in a couple of hours. Or tonight. She felt completely broken, but an idea began to form in her head. To write him a letter. She wouldn't be able to collect her thoughts over the phone, but in writing she would explain everything as she felt. Even if he doesn't forgive, at least he will find out how everything really was. Sarah turned on her laptop, opened her email, and with trembling hands began to write, pouring out her soul line by line. Mike, I don't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know the truth. Please read this letter. You have always been the best person in the world for me. Kind, reliable, loving. What I did was the worst thing I could do to you and to us. I have no excuses, but I want to explain why it all happened. I've lost myself in the last few months. After I quit my job, I fell into such a darkness that I couldn't feel anything. Every day I woke up thinking that my life was pointless, that I was worthless. I didn't tell you how bad I felt. I didn't want to burden you because you work so much, and I was afraid that you wouldn't understand, or that you'd think I was ungrateful. It wasn't your fault, Mike. You did everything you could to support me. The problem was me, that I backed myself into a corner and refused to accept help. When I met that man, it wasn't on purpose. I wasn't looking for anyone, I swear. He just happened to be there when I was completely devastated. He listened to me, made me feel like I was still alive. I'm not trying to justify myself, I'm just explaining. Alcohol, my despair, My loss of reason, nothing can justify cheating. I did something unforgivable. Just know one thing, I always loved you. Even when I stumbled, I loved you. I never blamed you for anything for a second. It was me who broke down and did stupid things. If I could turn back time, I would give anything to prevent this from happening. But I can't. All I can do is beg you to find the strength to forgive me someday. Maybe not for the sake of our marriage, but for your own sake, so you don't hold a grudge. You don't deserve this pain. You are the best husband anyone could ever dream of, and I am guilty before you forever. I have no forgiveness, but I still ask, forgive me. With love forever. Yours, Sarah. As Sarah reread the words she had typed, she could no longer hold back her tears. Drops fell onto the keyboard as she added at the end, I will wait for you as long as it takes. If you want to talk, I will always be there. She pressed send. The letter flew away. Now all that was left was to hope that Mike would read it. Late that evening, Mike sat in front of his laptop. He finally decided to open the email from Sarah that had arrived a couple of days ago. For a long time, he had avoided reading her words, afraid of feeling all the pain again. But now, staring at the empty wall, he clicked on the message. The lines swam before his eyes. Sarah wrote about her despair, about how she loved him, and how she reproached herself for what had happened. Each word echoed in his soul with a sharp melancholy, not with anger, but with quiet regret. At some point, Mike felt a tear roll down his cheek. He brushed it away with his palm and read to the end of the letter. Mike closed his laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. He wanted to answer, to write that he heard her and was suffering too. But no phrase came to mind. The wound was too fresh. In the end, he never answered, leaving the letter unanswered. Mike appeared on the horizon only the next day. More precisely, he sent a short message. I'm at David's. Don't worry. David is his colleague and friend with whom he is apparently staying. Sarah exhaled a little. At least he is alive and well. She replied immediately, Thank you for writing. I'm very worried. Please come back. We can live separately for now if you want, but let's talk. But he apparently didn't read these messages again. The days dragged on painfully and slowly. Sarah barely ate or slept. In the mornings, she mechanically got out of bed, fed the cat, then could sit on the couch for hours, staring at one point. Kate called and wrote every day, and eventually Sarah answered her friend with a few words that she was having big problems with Mike. Kate tried to find out the details, even to come, but Sarah refused. She did not want to justify herself or listen to consolation. She had to go through this herself. Jason called several times, first on Saturday night, then a day later. Sarah didn't answer. She had nothing to say to him. It was over. She wrote only a short text. I'm sorry. Everything that happened was a mistake. Please don't call again. There was no answer. Apparently, he understood. She had replayed that fateful evening with Jason dozens of times in her head, trying to understand why she had allowed it to happen. Had she loved that man? No, he had simply been there when she was broken. Sarah had sought in that relationship only oblivion from her own fears and emptiness. She wished bitterly that she could turn back time and do things differently, but it was impossible. In the middle of the week, an email notification arrived that Mike had read the letter. Sarah's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. He had read it, but there was no response from him, not a word. She didn't know what was going on in his soul. Maybe he hated her and would never forgive her. He had every right to. But she still hoped that her words had reached him at least a little. Every day she imagined walking into the empty house and seeing him in the living room or hearing his voice on the answering machine. But it never happened. They hadn't spoken since his last visit. Mike hadn't called or texted. The only thing she prayed for was that Mike wouldn't do anything stupid in his grief. She had trouble imagining how men dealt with that. The fact that he'd at least gone to a friend's house instead of just wandering off gave her hope that he'd be okay. Every day she was prepared for any outcome, that he would show up with divorce papers or, on the contrary, return to try to start over. The uncertainty drove her crazy. Almost a month passed. Sarah still lived in expectation, as if it were a punishment. But one Friday evening, the silence of the apartment was broken by the doorbell. About 2 weeks after Mike left, the silence in the house was broken by the sound of the front door opening. It was a weekday evening. Sarah, sitting on the couch with a book she couldn't concentrate on reading anyway, jumped. Footsteps were heard in the hallway. She jumped up, her heart jumping somewhere into her throat. Mike was standing in the living room doorway. He looked tired and thin. His face was unshaven, there were shadows under his eyes. In his hands was a cardboard box. "Hello," he said quietly. Hello," she responded uncertainly. They hadn't seen each other since that fateful Saturday. Sarah looked hungrily at his features, trying to understand what he was feeling. His expression was distant and cold. Mike dropped the box on the floor in the hallway. "I came to pick up some more of my things," he said evenly, "and to talk." Sarah nodded with bated breath. "Of course. I was so looking forward to us talking." Mike didn't answer. He walked past her into the living room and sank into a chair. Sarah sat on the edge of the sofa opposite, nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. For a while, both were silent. Finally, Mike spoke, looking away. "I read your letter." Sarah held her breath. He read it, but what did he think? "Thank you," she whispered. "I wanted you to know how it all happened." Mike nodded, but didn't turn his face. "I know," he said quietly. "I know now. But it doesn't make it any easier." Sarah looked down. The room was filled with a soft yellowish lamplight. The clock was ticking. Winston, sensing the owner, cautiously came out of the kitchen and stood frozen in the doorway, watching. "I can't change anything," Mike continued after a pause. "What happened has already happened, and it's very hard to live with." Sarah laced her fingers together nervously. "Mike," she said, barely audible, "I understand. I have no excuse. But if there's even the slightest chance, I'm willing to fix it, no matter how long it takes." He looked straight at her for the first time, his eyes tired. "Fix it," he repeated. "And how are you going to fix it, Sarah? How are we going to pretend it never happened?" Sarah paused, unsure of what to say. Mike pinched the bridge of his nose and exhaled. "I see you together every night," he said quietly. "In our house, on our bed. This image, it won't leave my head." Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I believe it is a pity." Mike raised his hand slightly, stopping her. "But you have to understand, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forget this, or forgive it." Sarah covered her face with her hands. The tears were flowing again, despite the fact that she thought she had cried everything out. "I haven't decided yet." He hesitated about the next steps. She realized he meant divorce, and her heart sank. "For now, I think it's better for us to be apart." He lowered his eyes. "It will be easier for me, and probably for you too." "No," she whispered back. "I'm not better off without you." He clenched his jaw, suppressing the overwhelming feeling, and rose from his chair. "One way or another, I'll live separately. I rented an apartment for a month, not far from work." Sarah nodded, trying to stop herself from shaking. "Okay, your things. Maybe I should pack them. What do you need? Tell me." "I've already taken everything I need." Mike pointed to the box. "Let the rest stay for now." He looked at the cat, who had come closer and was now rubbing against his leg, purring softly. Mike reached down and stroked Winston between the ears. Sarah watched this, biting her lips. Winston also missed his master. The cat had hardly left the front door in the last few days, as if waiting for his return. "Are you taking Winston?" she asked timidly. Mike straightened up, continuing to stroke his pet's furry back. "I don't think so," he said after some thought. "You have no one else now except him, and in my new apartment, animals are not allowed." Sarah nodded, feeling both relief and bitterness. Relief that the cat would stay with her, bitterness that Mike was talking to her as if she were a stranger, dividing up property and responsibility. "Thank you," she whispered. Mike just shrugged. He took a step towards the exit. Sarah's heart began to pound wildly. Was he really going to leave like this again? Perhaps forever. Mike took the box in his hands and turned around one last time, his gaze softening as he saw her pale, tear-stained face. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly, "and try to get your life together without me." Sarah took a deep breath. "Mike, I, I want you to be happy, even if not with me." His lips trembled. He nodded silently, turned and left. Sarah didn't rush after him. She realized that any pleas were pointless now. When the door closed behind him, she sank down on the floor next to the cat and burst into tears. Winston rubbed himself against her knees, trying to soothe her in his own way. Now the break was final. Their paths had finally diverged, and all that was left was to come to terms with it. Autumn had arrived. It had been about 2 months since Mike had moved out for good. The days were getting shorter, and the wind was blowing fallen leaves through the streets of Austin. Sarah lived alone in their old house, now her own house, as she bitterly corrected herself. At first, the loneliness seemed unbearable. Every corner reminded her of Mike. But gradually, she began to find the strength to get up in the morning and do something. On Kate's advice, Sarah went to see a psychologist. During her appointment with the psychologist, Sarah broke down in tears several times. "I myself destroyed everything good that I had," she said in a trembling voice. "You've been through a lot of trauma," Dr. Livingston said softly, pushing a box of tissues toward her. "But guilt is a sign that you care, and if you do, you can make things right, at least for yourself." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. She wasn't sure yet how she was going to live her life, but by the end of the session, for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Once a week, she visited this psychologist, an older woman who patiently listened to her tears and regrets, then gently steered the conversation toward the future. Little by little, Sarah learned not to fall into self-hatred, but to learn lessons. She realized how long she had been suppressing her problems, not wanting to share them with anyone. She realized that she had pushed Mike away at the beginning of her depression, closed herself off from him, and then looked for a way out in other people's attention. This discovery was painful, but at the same time, it gave her an understanding of herself. One of the therapist's exercises was to find an activity that would restore a sense of meaning, and Sarah decided it was time to return to what had once brought her joy: teaching. With shaking hands, she dialed the number of the principal of the school where she used to work. It turned out that the vacancy for a primary school teacher that Kate had written about was open again. After a couple of meetings and interviews, Sarah was hired for a trial period. The first day in class, she was as nervous as her first graders. As soon as she started getting to know the kids, the old feeling returned. The children looked at the new teacher with interest. During recess, one boy named Tommy shyly handed her a drawing with large letters, "Welcome back." Sarah barely held back her tears as she accepted the child's gift. She smiled at the student and realized that she was back in her place. Of course, at first it was scary. It seemed she had forgotten how to stand in front of the class. But the children greeted her warmly. Missing her work, Sarah plunged into preparing lessons, checking notebooks, and school chores. In the evenings, she began to get tired not from melancholy, but from real work. And this tiredness was pleasant. Of course, thoughts of Mike never left her. Every day she imagined opening the door and seeing him return with a bouquet of apologies. But it never happened. They still didn't communicate. All she learned from David was that Mike was doing more or less okay. He was working as before, living in a rented apartment. Sometimes Sarah almost decided to dial his number just to find out how he was. But she was afraid. What if her call would only hurt him more? She gave her word not to bother him anymore and held on as long as she could. On rare weekends, when loneliness was especially strong, she went to her parents' country house or went for a walk with Kate. Her friend never found out all the details, only guessed what had happened. Without pressuring her to confess, Kate was simply there, chatting about nothing. One day, Kate came to her with a homemade pie and sat her down at the kitchen table. insisting that she eat at least a couple of spoons. "You look a little better than you did a month ago," Kate noted, pouring tea. "Your eyes aren't so sad anymore." Sarah smiled weakly. "I'm gradually coming to my senses. Work helps." "That's great. You're strong, you'll cope." Her friend gently touched her hand. "And remember, I'm here. Call me anytime, even in the middle of the night." Sarah thanked her with her eyes. In this way, discussing trifles and sharing silence, her friend helped her while away the hardest evenings, and gradually the sharp pain began to recede. Little by little, Sarah noticed that she no longer woke up every morning with a feeling of utter hopelessness. Yes, regret and guilt still lingered in her heart, but now there was a quiet determination to live on, no matter what. During this time, Mike also tried to pull himself together. He still worked at the same company, but during the first weeks he could barely cope with his duties. His head was occupied only with what he had experienced. He spent his nights insomnia. As soon as he closed his eyes, painful images of betrayal flashed before his inner vision. Sometimes he gave in to tears. For the first time since his school years, when his father died, he allowed himself to cry, burying his face in the pillow. At such moments, he thanked God that he rented an apartment alone, without neighbors. David, a good friend who had given him temporary shelter, didn't ask any questions. But one day, finding Mike drunk and heartbroken, he gave him a brotherly hug and said, "You'll get through this, man." That night, Mike spoke about what had happened out loud for the first time. "I thought we would always be together," he said hoarsely, sitting on the kitchen floor with a bottle of beer. "How could she do this to me? What's wrong with me?" David sat down next to him and hugged him tightly by the shoulders. "Quiet, quiet, brother. It's not your fault. Sometimes shit happens. But you can handle it, you hear me? You can handle it." A month after the breakup, Mike finally decided to see a psychologist, recommended by his office doctor. Several sessions helped him release his pain and anger in a safe environment. He no longer flared up at the mere memory of Sarah. As before, gradually came the realization that what happened, as terrible as it was, did not completely cross out those years when they were happy. There were good times, after all. Life settled into a routine: work, an evening jog along the embankment, the occasional Friday night meeting with colleagues. Mike avoided the places he and Sarah had once gone to, and especially tried to stay away from the bar district. He was still in pain, but he noticed that it was getting less and less every day. Sometimes he caught himself missing not only Sarah, but even Winston. He remembered how the cat used to lie on his lap. However, he was not ready to go back. The feeling of betrayal remained too strong, even if he began to understand the reasons with his mind. One day in early November, Mike got word from David that their firm was opening a new office in Dallas and was looking for transfers. Mike, unwittingly, applied. He thought a change of scenery would be a chance to start over. Besides, there was nothing holding him back in Austin anymore. When the application was approved, he felt mixed emotions. He had to travel several hundred kilometers, leaving the city where he had spent the last 10 years of his life. On the one hand, he wanted to do this to break free from the web of memories. On the other hand, there was an incompleteness inside. He knew that if he left without talking, he would regret it. "Regret that I didn't tell Sarah the most important words that I've wanted to say for a long time." One cool Sunday morning in mid-November, Sarah's phone rang unexpectedly. When she saw the name Mike on the screen, she almost dropped the receiver. Her heart immediately thumped somewhere in her throat. "Hello?" The voice broke from excitement. "Hello, Sarah," a familiar, quiet voice came over the speaker. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears that were coming. For the first time in so long, he had called her himself. Hello," she breathed out. There was an awkward silence on the other end. Then Mike asked briefly, "Can we meet and talk?" Sarah pressed her free hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. "Yes, of course." "When?" "Today, if you have time," he answered. "Around 5 o'clock in the evening in Zilker Park by the central gazebo. Do you remember where it is?" Sarah nodded quickly, though he couldn't see it. "I remember. I will," she said quickly. Okay? Mike hesitated for a second. See you then. He hung up without saying goodbye. Sarah held the phone to her ear for a few moments, trying to comprehend that this wasn't a dream. Mike had made an appointment with her. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling a shiver run through her body. What was the meaning of this meeting? Why did he want to talk? Maybe he had finally decided to discuss the divorce? Or was it possible that he missed her? Sarah was afraid to build illusions. Most likely, it was a matter of official formalities, for example, selling the house or taking the remaining things. But the tone of his voice, it did not sound angry, but rather tired and calm. There were still a few hours until evening, and Sarah couldn't find a place for herself. She walked around the house, changing outfits several times until she chose modest jeans and a warm sweater. She wanted to look neat, but not ostentatious. Why dress up? This isn't a date, she smiled bitterly to herself. Dozens of thoughts about the upcoming conversations swarmed in her head. If he wanted a divorce, she had to accept it. If he just wanted to say goodbye before starting a new life, she had to endure it with dignity. The main thing was to see him, to hear what was on his mind. By 5 o'clock in the evening, Sarah was in Zilker Park. Late birds circled overhead, and the trees chirped with insects preparing for the night. The rolling lawn was a golden carpet of fallen leaves. The air smelled of autumn, and the sun was setting, painting the sky above the city in pinkish-orange tones. Sarah walked to an open wooden gazebo on a small rise. It overlooked the city center in the distance and the mirror-like surface of the pond below. Here, she and Mike had once walked on weekends, picnicked on the grass. The memories washed over her like a warm wave. Sarah froze when she noticed a familiar figure standing at the gazebo railing. Mike was already there, apparently having arrived earlier. He stood with his hands on the wooden railing and looked out into the distance, where the glass of Austin's skyscrapers glittered in the rays of the sunset. Sarah approached slowly, trying not to disturb the silence. Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat. She simultaneously wanted to rush to him and hug him, and at the same time to run away from the fear of the unknown. She stopped a few steps away, not daring to speak first. Mike turned around when he heard her footsteps. "Hello?" he said quietly. "Hello," she responded, looking down. He looked almost the same as he had 2 months ago, except that his hair was a little longer and his thinness was noticeable. However, his face seemed calm. They shifted awkwardly from one foot to the other for a few seconds. Mike spoke first. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Sarah swallowed. "Thank you for inviting me." They both stood in the shade of the gazebo, and around them lay the park, almost deserted on a Sunday evening. Only somewhere in the distance could they hear the voices of children on the playground and a man running along the path with his dogs. Mike motioned for her to sit on the low bench against the wall of the gazebo. Sarah sat down, her cold fingers gripping her knees. He sat down next to her, but kept his distance. For a while, they just looked at the crimson colors of the sky. Finally, Mike said quietly, "I'm getting ready to leave Austin." Sarah turned her head towards him. Everything inside her sank. "Leave? Where?" she breathed out. "To Dallas. For work," he explained. "In a week, maybe 2. Sarah felt panic and despair wash over her. Leaving. Did that mean it was all over for good? She stared at her feet, trying to control her emotions. "I realized it would be better this way," Mike continued, not looking at her, but somewhere ahead. "A new city, new faces. It's easier to start over there." "I see," she said barely audibly. A lump came to my throat, and I had to make an effort to breathe evenly. "I couldn't leave without talking to you," he suddenly added, and there were warm notes in his voice. "I don't know if this is still important to you, but—" He paused, choosing his words. Sarah's heart was pounding. She turned to him, looking at his profile. She had to say something before he changed his mind about revealing himself. "It's very important to me," she said quietly. "Please, speak. I'm listening." Mike took a deep breath and turned to face her, the sunset light reflecting in his eyes. "I want you to know," he began hesitantly, I said too much back there. I said that the woman I loved was dead. That's not true. That woman is alive, he continued. She made a terrible mistake, broke my heart, but I know that deep down, she's not a monster. He remembered how, 4 years ago, at his father's funeral, Sarah had stayed by his side, holding his hand and speaking softly to him. She had always been able to empathize. It was for this quality that he had once loved her with all his heart. His voice shook on the last word. Sarah couldn't help it. Tears gushed from her eyes, and she covered her face with her hands. Mike leaned slightly closer, but did not touch her. "Don't cry," he asked quietly. "I'm no saint either. I abandoned you when you were at rock bottom. Maybe if I'd been more attentive earlier, nothing would have happened." Sarah shook her head vigorously. "No, Mike, no. Don't say that. You're not guilty of anything." He smiled sadly. "We are both guilty and both not. It just happened." Sarah dropped her hands, trying to pull herself together. He'd said, "both of us." He hadn't put it all on her, and that hurt even more, because she knew the blame was almost entirely hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying this. It was important for me to hear." Mike looked down, fingering the sleeve of his jacket like a youth. "I thought about it for a long time," he said, "and I realized that I won't leave peacefully unless I let go of this pain." He looked straight at her and said very quietly, but clearly, "I forgive you, Sarah." The words came hard to him, but he knew that they would both have no peace otherwise. They came so suddenly that Sarah could not believe her ears at first. She sobbed and, looking at Mike through a veil of tears, asked again in a whisper, "You, forgive me." Mike nodded, trying to smile with the corner of his lips. "Yes, with all my heart." Sarah burst into tears, but now they were light, relieved tears. She covered her face with her hands and rocked back and forth, saying through her sobs, "Thank you. God, thank you." Mike paused, then hesitantly lifted his arm and put his arm around her shoulders. He stroked her lightly, letting her cry. "SHH, it's okay," he said quietly. "Please don't cry." Sarah pressed her forehead against his shoulder, allowing herself a few more seconds of weakness. Then she wiped her face with her sleeve and looked at him with eyes shining with tears. "You have no idea how important this is to me," she whispered. "Thank you." "I can imagine," he replied. "I felt better about myself as soon as I said it." They were silent for a while, collecting their thoughts. The sun had almost set while they were sitting. The sky was darkening, turning violet. The lights along the park paths came on. Mike removed his hand from her shoulder, although he remained seated next to her. Now that the main emotional burden had been lifted, a feeling of awkwardness arose what to do next. Sarah was the first to break the silence, trying to fill the pause. "You said you were leaving." Mike nodded. "Yes, in a week." "For how long?" "Forever, I think," he answered bluntly. "I don't think I'll go back to live in Austin." Sarah looked down and said quietly, "I understand." She tried sincerely to hide her sadness. She wanted to ask him to stay, but she knew she had no right. He deserved a new start. "And you?" he asked suddenly. "How? How are you now?" Sarah tried to discern what was behind the question. Concern? Simple curiosity. "I'm coping," she answered honestly. "Not right away, but I'm better." She ventured to add with a timid smile, "I'm working at school again, as a teacher, like before." Mike's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? That's wonderful." "Yes," she nodded. "It was hard at first, but now, I like it." "I'm happy for you," he said softly, and Sarah could see that he was genuinely happy. "And you?" she asked. "How are you? Apart from work, what do you do for a living?" He shrugged. "Yes, in general, I live by work. Sometimes I run in the evenings so I can meet with friends. Nothing special." She said carefully, "Sounds lonely." Mike chuckled. "It happens, but I guess I feel more comfortable this way now." Sarah nodded. She knew that after everything, he would need time to let someone into his life again. It might be many years. The park had become noticeably darker and colder. Sarah shivered in the chilly air. Mike remarked, Prodrogla, more chilly. A little, she admitted. Let's walk to the parking lot, he suggested. It's already dark. They stood up and walked slowly side by side along the alley strewn with rustling leaves. The lanterns illuminated their path with spots of golden light. Are you staying with David until you leave? Sarah asked, keeping the conversation going. No, I've already moved out, Mike answered. I rented an apartment for a couple of weeks to pack my things, and I don't want to bother Dev anymore. She nodded. The house. She began, not knowing how to ask correctly. What should I do with the house? Mike slowed his pace a little, then calmly replied. The house is yours to keep. I'll re-register the lease in your name. I can help with the payments for a while, don't worry. No, she shook her head. I can handle it myself. I have a salary now, albeit a small one. Besides, I might move in with my parents temporarily until things settle down financially. Okay, whatever you say, Mike didn't argue. If anything happens, contact me. Even though I'll be in another city, I'll always get in touch. Thank you, she said quietly. They approached the place where they parked their cars. It was almost dark. The few passers-by were hurrying to the exit of the park. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of the city center were blinking. Sarah pulled up to her old Honda, parked under a street light. Mike stood next to her. It was a moment of farewell, they both felt it. Unspoken words hung in the air. Sarah plucked up her courage and turned to him. I am very glad that we met today. Me too, he replied. I needed it. She smiled slightly through the approaching tears. I know we have different roads ahead, but I want you to be happy, Mike. You deserve it more than anyone. He lowered his eyes, then looked at her tenderly and sadly. And you deserve to be happy too, Sarah. She couldn't resist. She took a step forward and hugged him. At that moment, nothing existed for her except the warmth of his body for the last time. He froze for a moment and then hugged her tightly, like he had once upon a time. Sarah inhaled the familiar, homely scent. Tears welled up in her eyes, but now these were tears of gratitude and farewell. Forgive me again, she whispered into his shoulder. SHH, he stroked her back. It's all over now. They stood like that for a few long moments. Then they slowly released their embrace. Mike touched her wet cheek with his palm, wiping away a tear. Please take care of yourself, he said quietly. I promise, she replied. And kiss Winston for me. He tried to smile one last time. Sarah laughed hoarsely through her tears. Definitely. He misses you. Mike opened the door of his car and took one last look at her. Well, bye. Bye, she responded. He got into the car and started the engine. Sarah stepped back, raising her hand in farewell. Mike nodded. The car started moving, and soon, with two headlights, it was out on the road, disappearing into the darkness. Sarah watched her until the headlights disappeared around the corner. Then she exhaled, wiping her cheeks. Her soul was quiet and sorrowfully light. She was sorry to finally separate, but she knew it would be right for both of them. They forgave each other, which meant that each of them had a chance to start life anew. Sarah stood for a minute under the street lamp, peering into the autumn night, and then got into her car. The first stars were appearing in the sky. Almost a year passed. One spring day, Sarah, checking notebooks after school, suddenly caught herself smiling calmly. Life went on. The children in her class were noisy, and new goals awaited her. Mike had settled into life in Dallas during this time. They no longer spoke on the phone, but Sarah heard through mutual friends that he was doing well. He liked his new job. He began to spend more time with his friends. She was happy for him. Sometimes in the evenings, often stroking the purring Winston, Sarah thought of Mike with warm sadness. Somewhere out there, in another city, he, too, was starting a new chapter in his life. They both began it no longer together, but with gratitude for what they had. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.